We come now to local board input, and I have two requests from from Local Board Chair Richard Northey from the Waitemata Local Board, and from Chair Lotu Fuli from the Otara Papatoetoe Local Board, both to talk on item 10. So maybe if I can invite them up. If I see Richard here, is Lotu here, or somebody representing the Otara Papatoetoe Board? Not yet. They may come in during your presentation, Richard. Welcome to the governing body meeting, and rules for this section in this pretty much the same, 5 minutes and then up to 3 questions, but you're welcome of course to stay for our discussion on this particular item. Richard, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. The Waitemata Board resolved on its feedback last Tuesday that it's not in the agenda, but presumably you've all got copies of that. Basically, the proposed council submission we agree with, and we've commented on it by exception where we don't. One of the key things, and it's covered in your report on the elections in general, is the successful initiatives undertaken by the Auckland Council, including Vote Friday and the One Stop Shop. And those were very popular, and we urge that they be extended to places of worship, marae and community gatherings. Whether or not the responsibility for local elections is transferred to the Electoral Commission, it's really crucial that these sort of innovative responses to particular communities are undertaken at the next elections. The last thing we want is a bland, under-resourced national service, and the risk is, given that it'll be a central government vote, that they might under-resource the elections if they were responsible. There's some excellent research on the reasons for low voter turnout, and we agree with the idea that what's ideal is to have multimodal approaches that suit different age groups and ways of voting, and we're keen, given that 2/3 of the respondents would prefer online voting, for that to continue to be pursued. I know there are some people who believe that we'd only have fair online voting if the elections are irrelevant to the governments of Russia, China and North Korea, and we all think our elections are incredibly important. But they have conducted them for some time in Estonia, which is quite important to Russia, so hopefully that can be resolved, and that would assist with informed response to the election. One of the recommendations in the report that we are strongly opposed to is 6.4, which is to ban candidates who've been convicted of 4 offences for which they could be locked up for 2 years. We believe, firstly, in the ability for people to rehabilitate over time, and that's a choice that voters should have. And secondly, there are a number of people who'd have been excluded under this. Peter Fraser and half of the first Labour cabinet who are convicted and imprisoned for opposing conscription. A number of people who were arrested on Bastion Point in the late 1970s. Lucy Lawless for being on an oil drilling vessel. And until a few years ago, when an amnesty was declared, quite a number of people who are convicted of consensual same-sex activities. We think it's better to put on the candidate profile that there is such a conviction, and the person can then address that. Some of these would be badges of honour. I think that people should have that choice, provided it's informed. Another one, just in 9.22, you've sort of kept an open mind on the Electoral Commission role, but certainly the candidate profile statements are not perfect, but they do provide information on residents, and it could include this particular issue. There is the proposal that all elections in the same territorial authority be conducted by the same electoral system, rather STV or first past the post. We think it would only work if this was done at a regional level. The DHBs and the regional councils particularly DHBs, which are currently elected at large. If the territorial authorities have different systems, it's not workable. So it's got to be done at a regional level to cover the DHBs, and the regional council to cover the same thing. That could be a decision of the regional council, or it could be a joint decision of the TAs and the regional council and the DHB as to what system that they use in that area. Given the boundaries aren't quite the same, there'll be some fringe areas of regional councils and DHBs which would need to be accommodated, but that could be done. There's reference to licensing trust elections. I think it's important that these be conducted as part of the same election to get a credible mandate and turnout for those elections, given that they're responsible for community grants and the like. The DHBs, I've heard it didn't mentioned in the report, but I know there are a number of people who stopped filling in their ballot papers when they came to the DHB with their more than 30 names, and we strongly urge that a ward system be required for all DHBs that service 100,000 people or more to have at least 3 wards. You get number down to about 10, and it wouldn't scare people so much, and they're more likely to know people in their area. That worked well. People will recall the Waitemata DHB had wards covering North Shore, Waitakere and a rural ward with a member. The Auckland DHB had ones for the eastern and western suburb and southern suburbs, and that was manageable, and that would get the turnout up, and also more knowledgeable votes for DHBs. And with respect to Maori wards, we think that these should be treated the same as geographically based wards. There's a detailed process of proposal by the local authority, hearings, responses, appeal to the local government commission. We think that this is a good process rather than allowing for a poll which just raises a lot of unnecessary attitudes to race and Maori rights, as well as being expensive and creating uncertainty about the electoral system up to the election. So that's what we'd prefer to advocate. You're already advocating quite rightly that you should be able to determine the number of members as every other local authority does. If you don't get that change, then we agree that you should be able to decide the timing of a referendum.
Richard, we're just about up to
Yep,
take
that's
you
fine.
over time.
That's fine.
You complete?
I do note that I chaired the review last time, so if anyone wants to ask any questions about my attitudes on that, that's fine. But this is the local board submission, and I've finished.
Thank you very much. And just mention to governing board members that we will, of course, be appending the Waitemata local board's submission to our submission together with Kaipāriki, Upper Harbour and Otara Papatoetoe, which we have also received. Got a couple of questions. Councillor Newman.
Good morning, Richard, Ms. Northey. I just wonder if you had if the board or you has a comment at the moment in terms of the timing of any consideration around DHB wards, etc., and the electoral system, given the current review of the health and disability sector by Heather Simpson and that panel, and whether there is a potential that actually we might not have DHBs in their form, or maybe they're not directly elected in the future, and so is there a need for us to consider the timing of this conversation in relation to electoral systems affected by that in any way in your view?
No, I don't think so. As we know, government's obliged to move even more slowly than councils, so that whether there's any change or not, and there are likely to be less governing bodies in the health area rather than more, so that there would be even, there's a possibility that some members would be elected from even larger constituencies, so I think it still apply.
And whilst I actually agree with the board's view that recommendation 6.4 shouldn't be supported, I just wonder in relation to, and look, I'm very comfortable for people with convictions to run for public office and to declare those convictions, but I'm also aware that there is legislation in this country around after a period of time the effective concealment of convictions effectively wiping the slate clean.
right.
So, I mean, that doesn't seem to, I mean, are we reconciling with that? Because
Well, sorry, Daniel. What we're talking about is, and it applies to Parliament well. It is spent convictions you don't need to declare. So it's ones that are still valid, which is normally a 7-year period, unless they're very serious crimes with respect to violence and sexual abuse. Yep.
Thank you very much. Councillor Casey.
Richard, your comments, or the comments from the board about the abolition of the poll that has prevented 5 councils who've chosen to have Māori wards overturned. Would you like to say a bit more about that? Because I think we're a bit weak in our resolutions with regard to that. We haven't mentioned it at all.
Yes, well, I think so. I think basically the council, having worked through an issue and come to the conclusion that their decision-making would be improved by having a Maori ward or wards, there's no more reason to have that appealable by petition of ordinary voters, that one that decides that a particular town or needs to have its own representative on a council. There's plenty of opportunity for informed input from the public in that representation decision-making process, but the experience has been with the petitions that a lot of hate speech and generally negative debating has occurred that hasn't helped in determining what is the best form of representation for the council, and the process generally formed for geographical wards, I believe, should be followed, and this is what the council, in my view, should urge.
And you've preempted my second question, which was, do you think there's racism that prompts a poll when council have made a decision to have a Māori ward?
For some people.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to pick up on a question around the disclosure of serious criminal convictions. Now, I've been critical, and always have been, of people having to declare whether they live in the ward or not in the booklet, because in my view that's not strictly relevant. And I could go on about that, but I'll save your time. Do you feel that if people were having to disclose criminal convictions in the voting book, as it says in your submission here, that would prejudice candidates? And what would be the reasoning for having to disclose?
Well, our board was seeking to pull back from what was suggested in this draft submission and by Parliament, that they be excluded altogether. That's really what we said. There should be. It's unfortunate if somebody gets elected who is continuing to act in a way that's fraudulent or the like. But one might well hope that between the constituents and the media that would normally be able to be discovered without necessarily having to disclose it in the booklet. The booklet was a sort of backstop safeguard.
Yeah, I just think that parliamentarians should have the same rules as local government in terms of declaring on a voting paper what needs to be done. So they don't have to tell people where they live. That's or right. Anything like that. So.
Yep. Fair comment.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much for the question. So just make a very brief comment on that, and it's in line with what Councillor Henderson's just said. As I recall, Parliament, you don't have any disclosure of past convictions, and I've got a problem with Section 6 being included because a lot of people commit offences in their youth, and something that you do at 20 probably shouldn't be held against you permanently when you're 40 and you're running for office. So my suggestion maybe when we come to this section is simply to delete the section from the report. We certainly shouldn't have a harsher regime than is required by central government. We should probably have the same regime, which doesn't ban a person, nor does it actually explicitly require disclosure. If a person has committed a serious offence, that will be something that can be properly debated in the campaign, but shouldn't exclude them from running. Anyway, I'll move that we receive Richard's input and thank him for it. Seconded by Councillor Casey. All those in favour,